In this video, I'll be showing you how to add your plastic accessories into your board before laminating. I'm going to be adding a few plastic accessories into this board before fiberglassing it, including a fin box on the bottom, a leash plug in the tail block, a Gore-Tex vent near the tail, and 4 leash loops near the front of the board to serve as anchor points of my bungee cord cargo system. In a previous video, we talked about installing internal blocking to house those accessories within the hollow core, as well as marking the locations of your accessories with a small hole. To prepare your plastic parts, it's good practice to scuff up the surface that will be inserted into the board to create a better bond with the epoxy using a little rough sandpaper. And then apply a layer of masking tape over the top of each accessory so the epoxy doesn't fill the piece when you're inserting them into the board. To install my accessories, I'm using a router jig made out of a piece of 1/2-inch MDF that I cut out using my Shaper Origin tool. This jig allows the bearing on my flush trim router bit to reference the sides while cutting out the material below perfectly. These jigs can also easily be made at home with a piece of scrap plywood that you use to trace out the outline of your plastic parts. A Forstner bit and a drill can also be used to install the circular leash plugs and the vent. I'll include a link to download the digital template for these generic plastic parts below. Once your jig is ready to go, you need to choose the appropriate length flush trim bit for the accessory you're installing. I bought a set of flush trim bits from Amazon that I'll also link below. To set the depth of your router, set the jig onto the plate of your router while upside down and adjust the height until the bit is sticking out between 1/8 to 1/4 inch. To reduce the risk of tear out and damage, I just creep up on the final depth of my accessory 1/4 inch pass at a time. You also need to make sure that the flush trim bearing will ride against the inside of the jig template, or else there will be nothing to prevent your router from cutting into the jig, and worse, into your board, which would be very frustrating. I use double-sided tape and masking tape over the top of the jig to secure it to the board directly over the pinhole location that I made in a previous step. You want to make sure that the jig won't move around on you while you're using the router. Now, plunge cut routers are better suited for plunging into wood like this, but I don't have one of those, so I just tipped the tool on its side and brought it down carefully until the plate was flat against the jig. Then I simply just move the router around the jig to remove all the material using the sides of the jig as the guide template. Adjust the height of the bit 1/4 inch at a time until the accessory is fully embedded into your board. It's okay to leave a small bit of the accessory above the surface because that can be sanded flush after it's been set with epoxy and before laminating. There is also a wider lip around the vent and the leash that I also routed it out, so those wouldn't sit above the board surface. And now that all your accessory holes are routed out and your accessories have been prepped, you're ready to install the parts with some epoxy resin. Mix up a few ounces of your 2-to-1 epoxy into a small cup and pour it into your newly routed holes. It's best practice to use a stir stick or a brush to paint the sidewalls of each hole so that the epoxy is bonded all the way around your accessory. Next, just drop your accessory in and expect there to be some epoxy that squeezes out. Since my board is fully sanded and clean, I don't mind that extra epoxy coming out because I just take my plastic squeegee and scrape the epoxy firmly over the surface of the board until it's all absorbed, which acts like a seal coat that I'll be doing in the next step anyways. After that, just let the epoxy harden around each accessory before flipping the board over to repeat the process for the remaining parts. And in the next step, I'll walk you through how to prepare your board for fiberglassing.